Misinformation and disinformation. Do you know the difference? Can you tell when you're dealing with one and when you're dealing with the other? And do you think your financial advisor can tell? And do you think you understand what that means for the financial services industry?
This is Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast about financial blind spots, decision making, and how the reality of higher rates, global tensions, and tariff instability impact your investments. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto.
This week, we had a conversation with a very prominent media journalist who has spent a lot of time thinking about a lot of important things. And one of the things I asked him about was the distinction between misinformation and disinformation. Now, this is important to make sure that you understand this as well. The difference lies in intent, which is to say, it's sort of like the difference between lies and untruths. All lies are untrue, but not all untruths are lies. And that's because a lie is something that is knowingly false, whereas an untruth is just something that is false. Similarly, disinformation is something that is knowingly false. You're knowingly saying something which is not true, versus misinformation, which is merely parroting something which is untrue, but that might be unbeknownst to you. Now, this is extremely critical in the age of Donald Trump, because if you ever see any press conferences where his press secretary, Carolyn Levitt, is giving thoughts on what's going on and answering questions, so much of what you're hearing from her will be obvious, blatant disinformation. And the problem is that after there's so much of this, the public becomes desensitized, disinformation becomes normalized, and people lose their bearings and they have a hard time discerning between what's real and what's not real. And when you have someone who is the press secretary to the president standing in front of you with a completely straight face saying something which is obviously not true, that's going to be a major risk to societal norms and conventions, because suddenly people start believing things that are not true simply because the person saying them has, up until now, always been a credible person who normally wouldn't have to be fact-checked and that you would not have to worry about. This is a problem in the Canadian financial services industry. So as I discussed in my conversation with Steve Paikin on Thursday, we have a situation right now in Canada where there are financial advisors who believe things that are simply not true because the industry has socialized them into believing them. They have been co-opted, they have been groomed to believe things that are simply not true. These are things that in a research paper released in 2016 are called misguided beliefs. The unfortunate fact of the matter is that a very, very large percentage of Canadian mutual fund registrants have misguided beliefs. They believe things that are simply not true. And it seems as though that they have been disinformed somehow. I personally speculate that that is coming from the product suppliers that they use, because the product suppliers make money by spreading disinformation because it's good for business. So the specifics of the disinformation include these financial advisors chase past performance, even though the evidence shows very clearly that past performance may not be repeated and should not be relied upon. They use high-cost products with no real regard to product cost, even though the evidence is very, very clear that product cost correlates negatively to performance, and that low-cost products historically have always performed better simply because you get what you don't pay for. And if you can lower your cost, you can increase your after-cost returns. And they run concentrated positions. And if there's one thing that we learned from the work done by Harry Markowitz in the 1950s, is that the closest thing to a free lunch in finance is diversification. And yet these financial advisors load up on whatever's hot. And a lot of this could very well be a matter of financial advisors being enablers, where they look to a client who is unsophisticated and the client wants a product that has great returns over the past year or quarter or whatever. And the client doesn't know about cost and the client doesn't know about the evidence. And the advisor just wants to make money. So people don't resist their own ideas. The advisor, therefore, instead of saying, actually, Mr. Client, what you should be doing is you should be using this lower cost product. Actually, Mr. Client, you've got too much money in technology already. How about if you look for something that's maybe foreign or value stocks or what have you? So these are the sorts of things that go on. And the evidence that was shown in the paper in 2016 is that financial advisors are doing this even with their own accounts and even after they retire. So it seems as though they honestly believe that what they're doing is the right thing. And they haven't, it seems, internalized doing what is right, and they don't seem to be able to discern. They don't seem to have enough critical thinking in the way they go about their business to understand the difference between disinformation and misinformation. Now, my personal theory is that that is because of herding or social psychology, the idea that people just want to fit in. Conformity is a major driver of how financial advisors think. I have been an advisor for more than 30 years, and I can tell you that there's a lot of discussions that go on around the water cooler where one advisor will speak to another. Well, what product are you using and why and what's hot? And after a while, the alpha dogs of the office, the advisors that are making the most money, who are using certain products, people simply gravitate toward them and start saying, well, if this is good enough for the top producer, it might be good enough for me. And before you know it, there's a certain amount of groupthink that goes on in the office. These are all very much matters of concern for investors because financial advisors will hold out as being independent. And you need to be very careful and ask some very careful questions to make sure that your financial advisor is truly independent and is not merely spreading misinformation because he or she has been fed disinformation by other industry stakeholders.
This podcast is not to be construed as offering specific investment advice. Please consult a qualified advisor before acting. My books, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry and Bullshift, are available online. If you'd like to meet to discuss how the topics in this podcast affect you directly, please visit my website.